Let me welcome you here. Can people hear me? I hope so. It's been, about 15 years now that Marquette Law School's been hosting programs like this on major public issues with the goal of having a serious discussion with lots of different viewpoints and a very level-headed approach, what we call the town square. And education has been one of the subjects we've focused on a lot over the years. Obviously, we're still in the rebound from a couple years of virtual programs, as are so many organizations. So I'm very pleased to see so many of you here today in person, and I believe we have a fair number of people who are also watching a live stream, and we will be posting this for later viewing as well. But the subject is timely, to say the least, in the light of a variety of events, good and bad, the election last week, new test scores, the whole recovery of school systems from the pandemic and its impacts, which seem to be abating as far as how they're shaping school life. Especially in the aftermath of the election, it was easy for us to come up with the title for this conference of, "So Now What?" At the time we said that, we didn't know who was going to win, particularly the governor's race, but the question was certainly going to be relevant one way or the other. I might add that, just for the record, that we invited both of the candidates for governor prior to the election to be here, saying, if you're the winner, we want you here. Neither of them said yes, which I think was indicative of the degree to which education was both important, but not really a detailed focus in the campaigns. And we're here to, I hope, prod the conversation. We have a good pair of programs here, again, with the idea of multiple viewpoints and serious facts and points of view. We'll begin, let me actually go in reverse. The second part of the program, because I'll get to the introduction of the first part, is a panel discussion with 4 people who are each important figures in education discussion around Wisconsin, of quite diverse viewpoints. I think having them together in a group is, in my mind, a really special asset of these kind of programs. And so I want to welcome them and say that'll be coming up after our first program. Actually, before I introduce Aaron Richards, I also should say we're deeply appreciative of Marquette Law School and the Marquette College of Education, our co-host here, for giving us the green light to do these kind of programs. Yesterday I saw a tweet from the Education Writers of America, the Education Writers Association, that's the correct name, saying, which is the kind of professional group for education journalists, and it said, "Heads up, contest time is coming, get your contest entries ready." The picture that they posted on the tweet with it was Aaron Richards, because she was the winner of one of the most prominent of the awards at last year's competition. At that time, she was working at USA Today as a national education reporter. Prior to that, she was an education reporter for a decade or so at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And she left 7 or 8 months ago to go to work for an organization called the Center on Reinventing Public Education. Did I get it right? Center for Reinventing?
Everybody stumbles.
Yes. Which was based out of Seattle, is now based out of Arizona State University, but in the virtual world. Erin still lives in Milwaukee. And she has some title similar to managing editor for their publications. The center has a history of being a really interesting observer of what's going on in education, especially during the COVID period. They were one of the best sources for just, here's what we know about what school districts all over the country are doing. A couple months ago, they put out a report on the state of the American student. Erin was one of the main people involved in creating that report. And so we have asked her to do a presentation here on what they found about students across the country, with a little bit of an extra eye on this here state of Wisconsin. Erin is, I should say in candor, a good personal friend and someone who I really look up to as an example of what is going right in American education journalism. So, Erin Richards.
Sometimes I don't feel prepared to follow Alan's introductions because they're so generous that I feel a little underprepared. Okay, that's picking up me, I think, or is this coming from here? Are we good? Everybody can hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, as Alan said, so I was a reporter here for the Journal Sentinel for about a decade and then moved to USA Today in 2019. So I've really been following the national landscape of education for really since like end of 2018. And in so doing, this whole sleight of hand of really writing about and thinking about and being invested in the national landscape of education means that slowly over time I've become a little less connected to my own personal city school board and the school issues that are happening locally. So I have to work a little harder sometimes to lean into that. So please know that a lot of what I'm going to talk about is kind of this is kind of the scene setting of what we've looked at across the country. There's going to be times in this program today where we're going to dip in and talk a little bit more about Milwaukee and Wisconsin. But a lot of my headspace and a lot of the work I do now with SERPI, which this title is so long that as a person who likes to make fewer words rather than more, it always gets me a little bit. I also like to laugh because the education reporters I know like to call them creepy, which you can also do. That's totally fine. But anyway, we call this stuff SERPI. We've got about, because they used to be attached to the University of Washington, we have about 6 people located in Seattle. The rest of our people are scattered across the country. And now in about early 2022, SERPI pulled away from University of Washington, attached themselves to Arizona State University's Teachers College, which is doing some really innovative stuff in the realm of looking at different ways of arranging teachers in classrooms, more working in teams, less of the one teacher to 30 kids model. They've got a lot of, they've got their own lab school at the university that we're looking at maybe growing. So there's a lot of overlap. And one of my jobs, in addition to editing all the publications that come through us, that's written by our in-house researchers, and then also sometimes we team up with other groups that do more quantitative research. That'll come a little bit later. We have a project that we're doing with Rand Corporation. But the other thing I do is work with the Teachers College about how do we amplify their work, how do they amplify ours. And then you might have seen a lot of our stuff. If you read the 74, a lot of our original writings, pieces, they read a lot like news pieces. There's usually like a light recommendation or a little bit of opinion in them. They often run first in the 74 and then they'll be on our website as well. As I was designing this program, I was trying to figure out where to put these kids who, these are still the people that ground me in my work. It's the thing I miss most about being an education reporter. I don't get to work with kids as much anymore. I don't get to sit in classrooms as much anymore. I think we're all better when we do. I wish there was a requirement if you were going to be a politician who makes laws about education that you have to spend a certain number of hours in a classroom at least once a week or once a month. I think that would just really help people make better policy. If you don't see it every day, if you don't see the challenges every day, you're not really sure what you're making policies about. And even on the nonprofit realm, sometimes some of the recommendations we make are pretty lofty and not always grounded in reality. I'm probably sometimes a naysayer, even though I'm not a researcher, saying like, hey, can we like tone that down a little bit and recognize the challenges here? We're gonna come back to Mia in a second. She was, when I came to SERPI, they were rounding out the State of the Student report by basically compiling and organizing all of the data that they collected during the pandemic and trying to update where are we at, and then what can we say about what we know about where kids are academically, socially, emotionally, how are kids with disabilities doing? So I walked into this sort of 3/4 of the way through this major effort to kind of distill information and then say something about it. What do we want people to do with this information? We thought it was really important to include student voices, so we did a bunch of student videos. We were gonna hire a team. It was gonna take too long. I said, I'm a journalist, I can do this over Zoom. That was also the bad thing to say, because then I ended up having 2 jobs to do in my first couple months of the job. We're gonna hear from her a little later. She's got like a 1.5-minute video. Just to ground you, SERPI really elevated its work during the pandemic. They were one of the few, SERPI and Burbio were like the 2 places I was going to for information about, are schools open? What kind of education are you providing? If you're doing virtual, how many hours are kids required to be online? Is it all asynchronous? SERPI was asking those questions, and the government was just slow. They just couldn't get the data fast enough. So this is when their work really elevated, and I had talked, Robin Lake, the executive director, has been around for a long, long time, but she and her crew really kind of dug in and were doing a lot more quick turn research in the pandemic. We did a big deep dive on case studies on all these little micro schools that popped up in the pandemic, particularly micro schools run by parents of color, leaders of color in the community, run by people that weren't traditional teachers. I know that sometimes makes the traditional teaching establishment really antsy, but there were the research in a lot of these case studies, which were a lot of interviews with people that were running these, show that there was a lot of other like cultural value and connection that parents felt with these leaders of these schools. Most of these have melted away. The ones that have persisted are ones that have tapped into some kind of public funding source that has allowed them to continue, and we're continuing to research these. We've also been following the 100 largest districts in the country and looking at how they're spending their American Recovery Act dollars, what they were doing when it came to are schools open and closed in the beginning, what percentage of your kids are coming to school. Our researchers basically scrape all the data from the budget documents and anything online, anything that's publicly available, and then they code for certain words. So that's why we've got on our site, you can go and look at, you can search by district, you can search by stories that we've run on certain places. So like for Milwaukee, if you punch in the city name, you'll see that we've got a couple of stories about them. One that I edited recently was about how large districts are spending their Recovery Act dollars to train their staff, to recruit and retain staff. So Milwaukee had some effort to entice nurses to stay with some kind of a bonus if they signed for 3 years or something like that. So you can find a lot of information in there if you want to kind of dig in. We've got some databases in there too. I just heard from one of our researchers before this that if you look at, instead of looking at 22-23, which is the most recent database file, if you go to the year before, there might be a little bit more in that one. There just wasn't as much, because districts were kind of projecting for 22-23 when we pulled all that together. This is the project that we do with the RAND Corporation. They do the quantitative analysis of this, and we do the qualitative. It's called the American School District Panel, and it's an ongoing study with 6 large systems in the country, and it's completely anonymous. So unlike when I'm a reporter and I have to get people's names on the record, this allows the top leadership teams of 6 large systems in the country, I think it's 4 districts and 2 large charter networks, to speak very freely about the challenges that they're facing right now. And this report recently came out, and it basically says what any administrator in this room knows right now, which is that it's been really hard to focus on academic recovery and to do more advanced techniques that might help you get at academic recovery, which would be like learning acceleration, moving ahead with the material while also doing that quick hit catch up for kids that are struggling. It's been really hard to do that because a lot of staff need extra training. You need kids to be in school. And instead, we're having to focus on staffing shortages and other issues that are just detracting from the real nitty-gritty work of trying to accelerate kids' learning so we can get them at least back up to speed, if not at a better place that they were before the pandemic. So this is going to bring us to the State of the American Student Report. Again, this came from our crew saying we need to plant a stake in the ground about where we're at across the country when it comes to academics, emotional well-being, kids with disabilities, and like what the next thing districts need to do is. We're of course not the only ones that have put out reports like this. You've seen these from a bunch of the other big education organizations. What we're saying is we're going to keep doing this for the next 5 years. Every year now, which also, if I'd known that that was going to be the thing that I was going to sign up for when I took this job, I might have said no. But I think it's really important to say we're going to keep dipping back into this data. We're going to keep doing annual reports about those 3 areas, academics, emotional well-being, and the status of kids with disabilities. We tap researchers from around the country that are experts in those fields. fields, and we have them look at all the best research that was written in the last year on that topic, and then we have them compile it into a report that says, hey, these are the best people in this field, and this is the best research that has been done in the past year, and this is the latest that we know on this topic. So every year we're doing those, and every year those undergird this whole report. I want to let Mia talk for a second, and I think this next one is her. Let's see, I might have to go out of here to get her. Here she is. Is she up there? Good. Let me see if I can get her to. So some of you may know Charlene Moore, who runs Urban Underground. This is her daughter. She goes to Rufus King High School. Uh-oh, I may need a tech assist here. Anyway, Mia was one of the young people across the country that agreed to be interviewed a couple of times for this project. We were asking well, first we started with kids of all ages, but then as I was trying to talk to 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds about what they were dealing with in school over Zoom, while they were like I was like, well, I think I'm gonna have to focus on teenagers instead. So, but I tapped, some of you may know the National Parents Union, which has done a lot of work with parents both before the pandemic and during it. Carrie Rodriguez runs that group, lives out east near DC. Oh, good. Can I just hit this and go? Anyway, her son was 11 and talked about like the impact of racism in his school. He's a Latino in a mostly white school in the suburbs. And so I was struck, a lot of the kids didn't actually make it into the report with a video, but I was struck by how many kids talked about things that aren't directly related to like math and reading and like how I feel valued, how I feel as a black student in a mostly Latino school when I get called the N-word. I can't focus. It makes it hard for me to learn. Those are nuances that even we have a hard time capturing in stuff like this, and I just think it's important to acknowledge. Is she still stuck? Okay, there you go.
Freshman year, I was out of school, and that whole experience was really tough for me because I'm not like a virtual learner. I feel as though I would need more teacher support. I would love to see me build one-on-one connections with my teachers and not just that, like the surface level of just a teacher and a student. I would like to see my teachers to know more about me because a lot of the times teachers don't familiarize themselves with students. They just assign the homework and leave it at that, but they don't understand like what students go through at home or their personal life, and they're assigning all this homework, so it's hard to be able to build those connections with teachers and know what teachers need or know what students need from teachers. Another thing I would say is mental health resources. Very important, especially like with counseling. For me, like just coming back from virtual, I didn't want to talk with my parents about certain things, that I would with someone else. I feel like that's also important. That's also something that I want to see more in schools and more counselors of color, because a lot of the times we have, white counselors or counselors that don't represent us or don't look like me. So I would love to see that.
So I just thought, the research that the folks that I work with do is very, formal. This wasn't formal research. It's just getting kids in the moment to talk about what's important to them. And I thought, like, the representation issue, like teachers understanding me, counselors of color, like those are all things that they don't always rise when we're talking about like the dramatic test scores, gap and achievement gaps that we're going to get to in a minute. But I think they're really still important to keep at front and center as we talk about how we're going to help kids recover from all this. Many of you would recognize some of these graphics. This was from, our report came out in September, right when the NAEP longitudinal scores for 9-year-olds came out. And what really worries our group, which is highly focused on equity and helping the kids that are most behind get the resources they need, is how the size of the drop for the kids at the bottom of the scale, right? We all know that kids that were farthest behind before the pandemic are even farther behind now. One of the teenagers I interviewed in Fort Scott, Kansas, white kid, 16, he's doing great. He's hunting, he's fishing, he's on the football team. His grades are fine. He's got all the counseling and support he needs. He's in a rural high school, one high school in the district. Levi Griffith is going to be fine. I'm not worried about Levi Griffith too much. I want Levi to have what he needs, but I'm worried about students that aren't showing up to Carver Academy, and I'm worried about students in other districts where they're not getting the resources they need to get ahead. Some of you guys may know two researchers named Dan Goldhaber at the University of Washington and then Tom Kane at Harvard. Tom Kane is he's an economist, but he's really leaned into the whole pandemic learning loss and what do kids actually, what were some of the average losses, and then what do kids need to be able to catch up? So what they've estimated is that they've broken down these schools that were quick to reopen or slow to reopen, and they've tried to translate the learning loss into a number of weeks. And then they've tried to say, okay, if districts spent all of their Recovery Act dollars on high dosage tutoring, the one thing that research shows is really effective if done right, consistently, consistent attendance, high dose, low ratio of the tutor to kids or one-on-one, how much would they catch up, right? That would only be achievable if districts spent all of their money on high dosage tutoring. And we know that that's not happening, and it's probably not even likely given staffing and training and all of the other things. But Tom Kane also spoke at the Education Writers Association seminar at the end of the end of July. And he said, look, I'm really concerned, I think I've got it here. I'm really concerned that we're gonna kind of come through this year. Kids are back in school, things feel fairly normal. A lot of people are happy just that the schools are open and there's a routine again, but we're gonna get to the end of this year and we're gonna get to summer and fall and see that nothing has really changed. We've just, the conveyor belt has moved forward and the kids that were already here are still here, that the margin hasn't moved forward. So we know these other things from our research and those of others. Of course, we know that absenteeism is up. The mental health issues of kids are, especially for young women and young girls of color, are really concerning. And we don't have as many access, especially kids of color don't have access to as many mental health supports as other students do. One of the young women that I interviewed for the report lives in Queens. She's Indian, and she, I think for the first time, told an entire story of how she was hospitalized for trying to harm herself during the pandemic. And she's better now. She just graduated and she's going to major in psychology, which is great. I told her I'd like to check in with her for this next round. I think it would be fun to do if she's doing well and can talk about her story more specifically. It'd be nice to feature her and where she's come. But the depth of need that a lot of young adults and also kids need in the mental health area is really concerning. You guys all know this, if you work in schools or you're connected to schools, that last point is concerning because we're just not making we're not able to sometimes make the amount of changes this year, or there isn't enough organization and enough efforts coming together to help make those changes possible, right? You have to have kids in school, you have to have stable staff, but then what do we need to actually make the changes necessary to help kids catch up and to put different levers in place or different programs in place to make sure that we're doing things differently. This is SERPI's kind of stance, is that we need to do things different. High schools, we need to do more there. It's not effective for a lot of kids. We can't meet the needs of all these students as a monolith. We need to be more individualized. And of course, all of that takes more staffing, more time, and more planning. We're looking ahead, trying to think about how do we do things differently? Can we use this crisis as a pivot point to actually do something different for the future? I think if we don't, and if we just persist as we are now, it's just gonna kind of be the same old thing that we had before the pandemic, and that wasn't very good either for a lot of kids. So this is where we get a little bit more hopeful. What's actually working? So we have teamed up with this group called the Edu Recovery Hub. They're another nonprofit that's trying to look at what are places that are doing things differently around the country that are showing some promise, or how are they spending their Recovery Act dollars in ways that are more novel or that may have a greater effect than just prioritizing building needs. So we know Mesa quite well because it's just outside of where ASU is located near Tempe. There was just a really big story written by Neil Morton in Hechinger, but it ran with the Associated Press, so it went in a lot of papers around the country. The headline is something like, these teachers have 135 kids and they couldn't be happier. And it's about how they've tried to design teaching teams that allow teachers more of the flexibility that normal white collar workers have in the workplace, where you don't have to ask for somebody to watch something for you so you can go to the bathroom, and you could maybe take off to see your kid get to the dentist on time. So they've looked at how to do this, and the thing about Mesa is that they piloted this last year with like 6 schools, and now almost every school in Mesa is a big district, almost every school now has moved to this team teaching model for all grades. So I'm actually going to go out there in December and take a look at it myself. Indiana is sending like money straight to parents for tutoring. I don't know what the accountability lever is on that or how they follow the money exactly, but I'd like to know more. We've done a lot of work on Oakland Reach, which had one of the most effective grassroots parent uprisings and teachings, and like Oakland Reach was a grassroots parents group that basically taught parents and grandparents in the community how to be good liaisons for their friends and neighbors to make sure that kids got the tutoring that they needed. They did virtual tutoring, and now they've got what they call these literacy liberators, and they're working with the district with an actual, like, I think they've got some kind of agreement, or there's another component of like a formal tie-in there where they're going to actually embed these parent liberators, these educators, in school. These are not formally trained teachers. These are parents that have been given specific upskilling credentials, if you will, to focus very specifically on like early literacy components in a way that we all know is, you know, following the right methodology. And then the National Summer School Initiative, that's also sometimes called Cadence Learning. That is a program that has given, essentially taking master teachers and videoing their lessons live, and then letting teachers on the ground watch those lessons happen in real time. And then you have a person on the ground in Milwaukee that's also working with students that are in that cohort. So it's kind of like there's an online component with the teaching, but there's also a teacher live and in person with kids on the ground that is getting help and support from that master teacher. These are some bigger state initiatives. North Carolina is one of the leaders on like trying to get their state researchers to follow the research, follow the evidence, give us proposals on how you're going to not only look at what we're doing to address student learning loss, but actually measure its effectiveness, which is going to be the next big element in the next few years. Virginia, I don't know if this is actually going to come to fruition. It was only proposed fairly recently by Governor Youngkin, but he's saying that we're going to give every kid an individualized student data plan, or an individualized student success plan that's going to track their progress and give very specific feedback about what they need and how they're doing. I would be shocked if that happens that quickly, but maybe it will. And then Tennessee is doing like a statewide tutoring effort. They've tapped, I think, 5 or 6 community-based organizations. At least 3 or 4 of them are United Way, so there's some heft behind that, to look at how to provide high dosage, low ratio tutoring to up to about 20,000 kids. And then this is our kind of call to action to folks, is that we are trying to get folks to say, look, wherever you are, whoever your players are in the room, what do you think success will look like? Like, can we name some measures that would be a successful recovery 2 or 3 years from now? And I posed the same question to Tom Kane at Harvard in Orlando in July. I said, like, what else would you want to measure besides test scores? Is there something that we could measure that we're not measuring that we could do in a thoughtful way? And he said, I would love to see a school-by-school percentage of how many kids have consistent internet now. Not back when everybody was scrambling to make sure everybody had internet, but like right now, what percentage of kids in this school have steady internet access? And what percentage of kids in this school have a quiet place to study? That was one of the questions on the NAEP survey as well. But I think that would give us at least some data to say, okay, if this is an ongoing issue, how can we address it as a community with the resources we have, with the people in the area that we have? And then we also have kind of of course, the more lofty call is kind of like a large-scale research agenda. Like, where are we going? How are we using this time to do something different? And how could that be kind of like a national agenda? I think that one is much more far off. I think we're better off probably asking people to really look locally at what they can do in their own communities. But I do think it's good to have a vision for education that isn't just kind of stumbling back to the way we did things before the pandemic. These are just some questions, some of the same things we've just talked about. We're hoping that individual communities or states or localities would do their own State of the Student report every year. Like, how could you report to the community? I was talking with Ellen a little bit about this the other day. You know, that was something that Milwaukee Succeeds was kind of looking at as a community, getting all the players at the table. And and the initial baseline data was good, but we've long had a problem in Milwaukee and in our divided government state. And, even just looking at the margins on the election results, once again shows that we are just a very divided state. Getting the unification across political lines to do something different for kids has just long been a struggle here. And so I'm hoping that maybe this could be the nudge forward, but I don't know. I'm eager to hear from the next group of people about what they think the prospects are on that. This is where to find us. I'm going to shut the screen off here in a minute so we can chat. But if Robin Lake is also great. She's very active on Twitter, more active than me because I'm usually buried in spreadsheets or documents editing. But you can find us. We're most active on Twitter and LinkedIn. We're not really on Facebook. And then serpi.org has all the stuff I've talked about, and you can email me anytime, and I'm happy to point you in the right direction. Should I leave that on? Can I turn it? Is it okay if it goes off? Okay. I'm gonna go get my water. Hang on.
Let's chat a couple minutes, and we can probably take some questions also. I should give you a heads up that we'll take a break around 9:20 for, I hope, 10 minutes. Might be 12. And then we will have the panel discussion following that. Are there wholesale solutions? I mean, you're mostly talking about things in particular places. Is there something that really could be done nationwide? Let me add, Tom Kane from Harvard, who you mentioned, was one of 4 education researchers who had a piece in the Washington Post yesterday. They used a metaphor or analogy, which is the correct term, I think it's an analogy, that when President Kennedy in 1961, I think it was, said, we're going to go to the moon, they realized that that NASA did not have a rocket that could do that. So they set about creating a huge new rocket, the Saturn V, that was capable of sending astronauts to the moon. They said, where's the Saturn V now? We need change that's not within our capacity. Who's thinking about what we really need nationwide?
Nobody yet. We see, and there isn't even one state that's put out a really good agenda. Those last states that I showed you there have piecemeal. Like North Carolina's research agenda is really good. Like you should be able to tap the people in your state that know your state best to say, like, how can you do this? Put your collective wisdom toward that. Tennessee's kind of locked in on broad, wide-scale tutoring for the long term. But we don't see anybody that has like the whole package that we think kids need, especially the kids that need it the most. And I kind of thought, I mean, Cardona's a visionary guy. I kind of thought that he would be able to lasso that.
Secretary of Education.
Yes, Secretary of Education. I thought he would be able to lasso that with a bit more vigor. We've seen them, kind of trot out kind of the stuff that we saw before the pandemic. There's initiative on career-directed learning, and there's initiative on this. We don't see, the people that I'm orienting toward are the Tom Kanes of the world. There's not even a traditional education guy, he's an economist, who's calling for major change. And I see a vacuum, even at the national level, in who is going to provide that.
So let me be perhaps a little more provocative on a local basis. 20 or 25 years ago, Wisconsin and Milwaukee were in the national spotlight a lot. At one point, Education Week called Wisconsin ground zero. I think it was Milwaukee, actually, ground zero for education reform, largely because of the voucher movement. But MPS was doing different things then. The state policy under Tommy Thompson was, just had lots of different visions. Open enrollment, just changed. There was a pressure to try to do better. I don't see Wisconsin in the national spotlight anymore. I could read Ed Week or other places for 6 months and not come across the word Wisconsin, or reports such as you guys were doing. Where does Wisconsin fit into this national picture? gridlocked reality.
I mean, we just don't see Milwaukee rising in the data when we're scraping the stuff and we're looking for novel approaches or new ways of doing things. We're just not seeing anything really different here. At the state level, it still also feels like things have been a little anemic, but you're also dealing with a divided government. I mean, I feel like we're looking at 2 more years of kind of just a status quo because there hasn't been, it doesn't seem like there's been even a desire to try to put aside some political differences to do something really meaningful in education. And I think it's, because we have such different ideas here about how the money should be spent on schools, particularly for schools that are serving low-income kids and who's getting the best results. And each side makes valid points about how they're spending their money and the issues that they're most concerned about. But I don't know who has the power to light a fire under the state leaders in both the legislature and the education department and the governor's mansion to say, how could we actually do, is there anything we could actually do right now that would boost our state back up into the conversation of states that are actually trying new things? I mean, I haven't seen that yet. And I'm happy to be proven wrong. If there is something germinating, by golly, tell me and I'll write my own story about it. I'd love to highlight it.
No, I get it.
I'll write it for you.
I have first dibs. In general, you said high dosage mentoring is highly recommended. I think there's wide agreement on it. It's also got a lot of feasibility issues to the number of mentors. Mm-hmm. How are districts nationwide and, to your knowledge around here, using their ESSER money, as it's called?
We've looked closely at the ESSER money going to different buckets of needs. Honestly, the biggest expenditure for ESSER money has been facilities, and that makes sense, right? It's one-time money. You don't want to hire a bunch of. I mean, even we've seen spending on additional mental health supports or additional supports for students and adults in the mental health area, but even that's a finite resource. You can't just suddenly graduate a bunch of mental health experts and then hire them and then fire them in 2 years from now. In terms of the learning recovery, sort of academic recovery, it's a smaller bucket than you would think. Districts only have to spend up to, or states or districts, they only have to spend, they have to spend at least 20% of their money on academic recovery of some kind. The vein of that we see most effective in the research in terms of classroom instruction is the idea of learning acceleration, bringing teaching at grade level for all students and then having the resources in place either from the single teacher or teacher supports or aides, volunteers, to then catch those kids up who clearly are, you're moving ahead, but they're still here. So you've got to get them to go forward. And when we interviewed those district leaders at those 6 large systems in a full year and a half ago, they said, by golly, we can do that. We are fired up. The kids are coming back. We are going to do learning acceleration. When we interviewed them 8 months later, they said, so we're not doing learning acceleration because we are missing staff. We don't have all our students back. We don't have the capacity for staff training. We can't get everybody to do this thing. We can't tell them to do this thing without training them to do it. So in lieu of that, we're doing kind of what we did before. We're going back to the things that we did before the pandemic to catch kids up that are struggling. We are doing some individual pullouts. We're trying to do more project-based learning to keep kids interested. We are relying on our volunteers to do some of this. So it's either going to take longer to try to do those more aggressive learning recovery methods, or it's going to take a lot more community support. We were talking earlier, I don't know where Christy is. We were talking about Carver Academy is doing a much more concerted effort around tutoring, and it's in part because Common Ground, am I correct, is running that tutoring program. And I think this is another thing that came out. Dan Dominic, who is the outgoing president of the Superintendents Association of the National Superintendents Association, also said back in July to all the education reporters in the country, he said, we have really kept the doors closed on, we think we've been open to businesses, but we really haven't been. We don't really want a whole bunch of people in our schools meddling with the way we do things. He goes, we need to be more open. We need to be more honest about what our needs are, because educators naturally and appropriately want to project that they have everything under control, but they also need to be honest about the depth of need and like who else in your community could be of service here to you, and how could we train them to be, just like Oakland Reach has taken parents that a lot of them don't even have a high school education, but they're passionate about their kids, they want their kids to have a better life, and they're like, you know what, if you can come to a 6-week program and we provide you daycare, would you come from 6 to 7 p.m. or 5:30 to 6 p.m. and we'll feed you and train you, and then you can work with parents in the community and we'll all help our kids get better. I mean, it's an interesting model to watch. I'd say Oakland has the best sort of community activated lassoing around parents of color and then like training parents to train other parents in a really thoughtful way that I questioned it at first. I thought it was maybe a flash in the pan, but it's growing, and we're following them because it's intriguing, and I'm curious to see if other cities might be able to replicate that kind of energy. I mean, that is where, like, that Oakland gives me hope right now. That's the place that I look toward.
To your knowledge, has anything changed as far as early childhood issues?
I mean, other than they're still struggling for staff, no. No, and we haven't done as much research in that area. I mean, we all, of course, we all know it's an issue, and the staffing issues have been huge. I know that there's been a boost. There's been some support with the, there's a stream of dollars there that's been helpful. I'm forgetting the name of it. Someone else will know it here, to kind of keep afloat some of those programs, but
it's time limited.
I mean, we don't have a plan for after that. And that also seems like something that both at the national level and the state level, we should be able to, like, that seems like early childhood should be fairly nonpartisan. Don't we want kids to have the basics from a young age?
The same is true with the whole notion of reading. I mean, reading is a national crisis. It's especially a local crisis. I mean, Milwaukee scores, for all sectors, I might add, are really worrisome. You would think that would be a nonpartisan issue.
It does, but it's expensive, you know, and it's difficult work, and nobody wants to pay anybody very much to do it because it doesn't seem like you need to be very educated. I think that's wrong-headed also. We need to value the people that are teaching our youngest future community members.
If you were looking to Wisconsin for the next not only 4 years, but say 10 years, what would you want to see priority?
Oh boy.
That's not a fair question.
That's hard.
I just asked a question.
I need like an outline and some time to think. Whole state? Just Milwaukee?
Well,
Both?
either. Both. I always refer to Milwaukee as the state capital of education issues. But that kind of parent activation, just as far as how to work with your kids. I'm not even talking about, the suburban type partisanship stuff.
I mean, you and I have both done, just gobs of stories over the years about the importance of that family connection, and which is also easy to kind of let go because we expect schools to do the things that schools need to do. But every time I get into one of these projects, we did the homeschooling connection back when I was a baby reporter, and you and I were in the newsroom together, and about it's a squishy topic, right? Like, how do you get schools to work better with parents? And most schools think they have a pretty good family relations component, but most don't. I mean, most parents, especially if you're in poverty, are pretty out of touch with what's happening in school insofar as being able to be very engaged in your kids' learning and engaged in helping them see what their future is going to be years down the road. I mean, that's the thing that Oakland seems to have really locked in on, is training parents to not only be passionate about where their kids are going, but showing them the steps of how to do it. Here's how to map out your kids' 4 years in high school. Here's what they need to know by middle school. Here's how we're going to rally around you and make it fun and connected. Memphis has a really good parent training program that I dipped into during the pandemic because they were doing it virtually. And it was all about teaching parents, first of all, there was a community built around it, right? It was you come online, you don't have to leave your house, we're going to validate you from wherever you are. We're going to recognize how much of a struggle this is. And then we're going to, talk about how to read your kid's report card and what to ask their teacher about. I think that's Memphis Lift. And there's another one in Nashville Propel, which is also very tuned into parents. And I think the National Parents Union, too, is tapped into this level of parenting that don't always have the most voice in the room, because often it's parents with resources that tend to be the loudest. And I think the same thing happened with that big project I followed, where I followed why kids in Milwaukee go to so many different schools, especially kids that are, in high poverty and in, precarious living situations sometimes. And it's like, a lot of times parents just don't know how to help their kids. And so that's not something we can exactly legislate, but it does feel like something that we could do as a community more thoughtfully, and it does feel like there's other models out there. So if we could even get to the point of having more parents in this community be knowledgeable of what their kids need, I think that would be a start. I think the early childhood stuff just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, can't we charge me double on my taxes? I'm happy to pay for it. Like, let's help. So it's that kind of stuff that is not always the lawmaking element. It's the tough community stuff that we've got to figure it out.
We'll go over time enough to take a couple questions, I hope. Yes, sir.
You talk about getting parents more involved. I would love to volunteer. Love to be doing this.
No, I think it is. I mean, listen, when I was no longer a reporter in Milwaukee, I tried to volunteer for MPS. I signed up as a volunteer for MPS. Try to do. You guys laugh. Like, am I naive? I thought it was going to be easy. It wasn't easy. I couldn't get into the class. I was trying to do it virtually. Things were disorganized. I'm sure the teacher was trying, but I don't think it's pie in the sky. But we have an issue in the city with a lot of little groups that do their own thing and nothing that's an umbrella thing that feels like for this issue could be something quite meaningful, but that would also mean that maybe some of the smaller groups would need to stop what they're doing or combine forces and work it out with the bigger groups to say, this is how we're going to teach a 6-week reading tutoring thing, and we're all going to do it this way, and we're all going to agree to do it this way. That would take somebody in this community to lead that, to herd the cats. I mean, that's
Sounds lovely
Right.
to me, but you just
why, well, are you qualified to do that? Maybe you can do it.
My advice for people volunteering for quite a number of years has been try to find a specific school, even within a public school system, and a principal who's receptive, because they're the ones who can make it happen. And if you do it on a broader bureaucratic basis, it can be really, really frustrating.
No, I think it's just a lower priority. I think teachers are stressed, and it's hard.
charter school.
Yeah.
Public schools are the ones
It's very much school to school.
Mhm.
The question is, should we reinvest in teachers and teacher education? Are we disinvesting at the wrong?
Yeah. No, I think it's a really valid point. That's why sometimes when there's some people on my staff that go pretty far down the road of, we just need to have connections to the community, and I'm like, whoa, wait, like credentials are important too, and training is important too. I think the other thing we're watching is this national trend that where a lot of education schools, like enrollment is going down. ASU, it's gone up significantly, which is meaningful, but I think it's because they've got like a lot of different pathways. They've like, here's where you're going to go to do this kind of teaching. Here's where you're going to go to do this kind of teaching. And I think that, to your point, We do need to be validating that. I was at a career fair yesterday in West Dallas, and one of the young women came up and she was like, I want to be an elementary school teacher. And I was like, oh, thank God. We've got another one coming down. So, but do you think there are ways that the community can validate that, or is it up to the media and other kind of leaders to lift that up?
So the points, just to repeat there, that teachers are saying in fairly large numbers, I can't cope in the classroom anymore. It's too much and too much disrespect. And colleges of ed or preparation programs for higher for training teachers are getting gutted. These are really serious issues. We'll take one more.
Right.
So the question is, just to repeat, are there places that are doing creative and effective things to improve the teacher workforce?
Yeah, I mean, when I was at USA Today, I did a story about like, grow your own programs. And at that time, probably around, I don't know, before the pandemic, I probably only found a handful that seemed pretty solid, that they had like a wave that had already come through. And now, in the data that we've got on spending on pandemic recovery, or like their Recovery Act dollars, we've seen a lot more districts lean into the grow your own, tapping high school students, and then pairing them up with a mentor teacher that stays with them all the way through. I think that's really important. Like having those enthusiastic teachers that really love the profession, take someone under their wing who's younger and be like, you can do this. Like you can go straight into school and have, be in the classroom pretty quickly. Paying people. There's another model that we haven't looked at, but I read about it, about paying high school students in the summertime to be math tutors of kids that are a few grades younger, to give them like not only the incentive to get some experience, but also just be good guides, be elder mentors and peers to younger students. And then we've also seen, and again, I'll only mention ASU because I'm more familiar with it because I live and breathe in that space now, but they've started a bunch of programs where they're trying to do lower cost, lower entry ways for people that don't have teaching credentials to at least get that, like a baseline. And then some districts are actually subsidizing that to help offset the cost, so they can at least get their paras or their aides to that next level. And then ASU is building like these micro credentials on top of that can then be another thing, and with the hope of that maybe after that we could also get you into a full, if a full 4 years is what you need, we'll get you that as well. So those, but the grow your own programs have really exploded with the advent of the Recovery Act dollars.
We are going to take a 10-minute break, set up the room here for the panel discussion, and I believe there's coffee and perhaps some other goodies outside here in the back. So stretch, come back, and we will continue. A great thanks to Aaron Richards for being part of this program.
Check, check. Check, check, check. Check, check. Those lights turned up. Check, 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 check. Check 1, 2, check.
We are going to attempt to start. I'm hoping a few more people will sit down, but I'm glad to give people a chance to connect, network, as we say. And let me welcome you back. We have 4 people up here who are all serious, smart actors in the education scene and who do have some differences of opinion. And that's very appealing to me, as I said at the start, that we like this sense of exchange and of conversation. These people, I hope will involve some of you in the audience as well. Let me begin by introducing them, and we'll just go in order across here. Libby Sobek, to my immediate left here, if I've got the title correct, here is Director and Legal Counsel for Education Policy at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, that's the other L. I knew it was something, which, as I suspect everyone knows, is a increasingly influential and active conservative law firm and think tank. They get involved in lots of stuff. Libby, we are glad to note, is also a graduate of this law school. To her left is Aisha Carr, a member of the Milwaukee School Board, a longtime activist on behalf of kids and former MPS teacher, special ed teacher, involved in issues such as what are called opportunity youth, which are, correct me if I'm wrong, 17 to 25-year-olds, 17 to 24-year-olds who are not in school and not working. And you could label that a problem, or you could label that an opportunity. And she's involved in labeling an opportunity. And so welcome to Aisha. She is, let's see here, 2 years into her first term. Well, I'm rounding up. I'm rounding up. The year and a half into her first term on the Milwaukee School Board. And Heather DuBois-Bername is the, what's the correct title? Executive Director of the Wisconsin Public Education Network. Is that the correct title? And lives in Sun Prairie, has been active in Sun Prairie school issues, and the Wisconsin Public Education Network is exactly that, a network of people who are passionate advocates for the public schools in Wisconsin, and also get involved in lots of important issues, somewhat at a different point in the spectrum than Will, but okay. This is good. And Faith Vanderhorst is the interim executive director of the Southeastern Wisconsin Schools Association. Alliance, excuse me. I'm never good at titles. I always have to look them up. Which is an association of most of the school districts in southeastern Wisconsin. School board members, superintendents meet like monthly and just sort of share their concerns and also do a bit of lobbying in Madison and such. So let's begin. The title of this whole session is So Now What? And that would be my first question. So now what? We're post-election. We're post the release of data showing how urgent we have are the education needs, especially for our low-income and minority students, but statewide across everybody. We're also still, as Aaron Richards so much outlined, coming out of a period that was tough for everybody, kids, parents, teachers. So now what? Which I would frame as 2 things. What would you like to see, especially going into the next legislative session in Wisconsin? So what would you like to see? What do you expect to see? Issues coming up. Let's start with Libby.
Well, thank you for having me. So I'm going to say first, what I expect to see is we've kind of seen it played out in the media this week, right? We're already talking about education and its role that it's going to have in the state budget. I expect it to be a hot topic, but I hope to see that we are able to actually have a conversation about how we're going to put school funding and our surplus to use. I would say at will, and what I would love to see is a conversation of changing how we talk about school funding. Right now, we talk about systems. We talk about school districts. We talk about revenue limits. We talk about parental choice programs. We don't really talk about students, particularly at the state level. We don't talk about student need based off of what they need. An English language learner, a student with disabilities, low-income child. We don't talk through that lens. And so what I would hope to see as an opportunity is to change our language around school funding and finance to really try to bring and bridge this divide of divided government. Lest you think I am overly optimistic, I will point out two things. One, Governor Evers, when he was superintendent of public instruction, actually supported this concept in his state budgets. And two, we've seen governors across the political spectrum, across our nation, both in Tennessee and Illinois, talk about this type of reform in school finance. So it's not totally pie in the sky, and I think that that's the biggest opportunity we have for this budget in terms of education.
Thank you for
Aisha.
inviting me. What I will say is, I'll start by saying that I think one of the fundamental issues that we see in America is that people really don't give a damn about children. And it shows in the reports, it shows in the research, the data, it shows in our theories and our practices. And so we watched this political season play out, and education was presented as an afterthought. There was not much talk about education priorities, the education crisis facing our public school systems, and even the funding inequities around public schools, charters, and the choice movement. There was not much discussion about it. And so I think we have reached a point where the urgency is unparalleled with educators, with school leaders, but it has to be unparalleled, and that urgency has to be matched on a systemic macro level. Some of the things I will say in terms of what we need to see more urgency around prioritizing the needs of educators. We have, during this pandemic, saw essential workers being praised in so many other fields, but what about the teachers? What about school leadership? We've seen funding come through, and the funding, in my humble opinion, is really addressing the administrative, top-heavy administrative needs and not trickling down to the classrooms and to the students who need it most. And so there's so many things that needs to be done, but in my humble opinion, we have to prioritize education, and the reality is, it isn't.
Why don't you use that one? We'll keep two here and two there.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, too. I'm very honored to be here. I was invited, I believe, to be on the panel because I hold the radically contentious view that every single kid in every single public school in this state can and should have access to an equally great public education. There is absolutely no reason why we can't provide that to our kids. The question is, why don't we? And so what I'd like to see is every kid thriving in every single school. Kids going to schools that are places of joy, educators who feel valued and respected at every level, parents and caregivers who are actively engaged in everything about how we do school. Every opportunity that democracy affords us in our public schools is an opportunity for parents to, and caregivers obviously, to take part in these things. And I want to see more of that. I worry that I'm not going to see much of that this year if we see the same kind of political game playing that we've seen in past sessions. But I also know that the fire that Aaron talked about lighting is already burning really bright in this state. People are frustrated with the political state of affairs and playing games with our kids and their school funding. And I think if everyone who's paying attention to this conversation today just did a little bit more in trying to motivate lawmakers to vote their conscience when they pass a budget next year, we can really deliver on that change. We're sitting on a massive surplus. We have a plan on the table, and we can talk more about what that will look like as we go through this conversation.
And again, thank you for having me as well. A lot of great things have been said up here. And I've had some conversations this last week or so just to find out what the folks that are involved in SWSA, which is about 31 school districts in southeastern Wisconsin. And if you know our membership, it includes the large MPS system all the way down to some of the smaller community and suburban schools. So we do have some diverse issues that we're looking into. But it was said to me this week, why can't Wisconsin just focus on being number one in education in the country? Number one. You know, we're competitive with the Packers, we're competitive with the Bucks. Why can't we focus, and I'm sorry, I'm not a baseball fan, Brewers I guess too, but why can't we focus on schools and stop using our children as just something to toss around? The money needs to be there. The innovation needs to be there instead of constantly bickering back and forth. And our group does, Libby, we talk a lot about these issues, mental health, special ed. And having been on the school board for 15 years and the president for the last 9, I just stepped off this spring, when every time we met with our legislators, that's what we talked about. Here's what our needs are. We need funding for our career and pathways, and we want to get kids into apprenticeships, and they want hands-on experiences. And maybe this old notion of going to school from September to the middle of June isn't working anymore, because that was established 100 years ago. Maybe because of learning loss and just the way everything works out, maybe we need to go year-round and have pockets of 2 and 3 weeks a year off. The school district I was involved in looked into that probably 12 years ago, and literally people's heads exploded because it took away from my up north time. But maybe it works for kids. We don't know. Is that a piece of innovation? So I think there's some great things, to Heather's point, happening in this state. There are school districts that are combining up near Green Bay and putting together academies, and they're working with their businesses and their technical colleges to provide hands-on opportunities. I think there's a lot that can be done in the rest of the state. And what we don't want to leave out are the rural schools, because they are struggling to find, we all are struggling for high quality teachers and teachers overall, but they are really struggling to attract people to come into the far north town where it's cold and there's a tiny little district. They're struggling with that. They're struggling with transportation issues. We want to make sure we don't forget, because that's where a lot of our kids are too. Thank you.
In the big picture, Wisconsin, and particularly Milwaukee, has faced a reading crisis that hasn't changed for at least 20 years. And in fact has gotten worse in the last several years. Even before the pandemic, national reading scores went down. Wisconsin scores moved down just a little. And now, in the recent results, they're really bad. I mean, like for Milwaukee Public Schools, it's like 15% that are proficient or better in reading. Even if you add in the basics, it's around 50%. What would move the needle on something like that? What do we need to do to get out of this pit we've been in, where we've got the worst scores in the country for black kids? We've got some of the worst scores for poor kids in general. Is there a button to push, or several buttons to push, and what is it? We'll start the opposite order here, Faith.
Thank you.
When introducing Faith, I neglected to say she's past president of the Menominee Falls School Board and served on the board for 15 years. So when she referred to her service, that's where it was.
Thank you. I did survey some of our superintendents before I came to find out what they are all doing to bridge this gap and to rebound on the some of the issues. And it seems that everybody is kind of jointly speaking about the program called Science of Reading, which in my simple mind turns out to be phonics. And a lot of you in the room that are probably my age, that's how we learned. And somewhere along the line, all the others, the theories crept in, and now everybody's rolling back in. And I don't see that it's an immediate instant bullet, but one school district has already said they've seen tremendous gains already with using that. But they are using some of their ESSER money to train, because there's a lot of teacher training involved in that, and trying to get it across the whole elementary system. My school district a few years ago went so far as trained a great deal of teachers, sent them to be reading specialists in the high school. Because they found that the technical books that some of these kids were reading, and the IT stuff, the higher end science, the AP courses were technical. If you've ever read these books, they're hard to read. They're college level classes. So, I don't know if they're still doing that. Jim's in the room. But we did have reading teachers in the high school to help with that as well. So it's probably the high dose tutoring, as you talked about.
Yeah, we'll come back this way.
+1 to everything Faith just listed as things that could possibly work. Let's start by listening to the kids. I mean, what did Mia say in the video? She wants her teachers to know who she is. She wants to be seen and heard and understood as a human. And until we create the conditions where every single kid in every single classroom feels like they're valued, knows that they belong, has the resources and supports they need to thrive in their school environment, until every kid goes to a school that has all the music, all the arts, a nice playground, the same things that are afforded to the kids in schools where everybody has higher reading scores, we're not going to see that kind of shift in this state. We have to resolve the inequities that we make worse, budget after budget and year after year and policy decision after policy decision, if we're going to close these gaps. And I think really the most important gap of all is that joy gap. If kids don't love learning, how can they learn? We can't just math them to death and say you're so far behind right in front of their faces all the time. That makes an impact on kids. We need to give them affirming environments where they can thrive. And let's also be honest about what we haven't done in the last 20 years since these scores have stagnated. These scores reflect the state's chronic disinvestment in its public systems. We have frozen spending at 1993 levels since this time. We saw the greatest cuts to public education in the history of cuts to public education in the year 2011, and we have not recovered from those. In fact, we're $3.9 billion below where we were in 2009 when you adjust for inflation. And so we need to be honest about how much money we're actually allocating to schools, and we need to flip the system so that the way we fund schools in this state has to do with student need, not property values. That would be a great place to start. And then we'll see reading scores improve. And then we'll see kids who want to go to school and who love to read and love to learn.
Hear me? Okay. So one of the things I agree with is that things have to be done differently. I feel like COVID, of course, presented many challenges. But it also presented many opportunities. It was a time where mandates were lifted, and it was just like we're all trying to scramble and figure it out. I remember the weekend when the announcement was made about closures indefinitely. I had 7 young students, including my daughter, at home, and things just right away went into virtual platform. And I recall students struggling with their teachers and vice versa. I recall teachers being mom and the educator, operating in dual capacities, and it was a struggle. And so my thought at that time was, why don't we just, like, we're at the bottom, and there's so much uncertainty. Why not just do something different and figure out what works and what doesn't. One of the things I proposed earlier this year in my school board capacity was a feasibility study to re-envision how we teach. And of course, it was marketed as this 4-day school week, which that was not the intention at all. If you ask me, I honestly believe like we should be in a year round until we, catch up. Or again, going back to doing something different, change our instructional models along with the traditional school constructs. But in this feasibility study, my vision was to identify schools that will be willing to redesign their instructional models to build in more remediation services, more interventions during the school day, and focus on the core academic areas, and re-envision how we teach on that 5th day, or maybe that 5th day is a Monday or a Wednesday, but creating intentional partnerships with community-based organizations to come in, working with employers to create more extended learning opportunities on that one day, thus allowing educators to plan and to build relationships and to invest in school community and school culture. But again, in those 4 days, focusing on core academic subject areas. And in that, my goal was to increase the investments in reading interventionists, because we talk about English language arts, we talk about science, we talk about math, but the bottom line is reading is the foundation. And a lot of teachers are not equipped with the skills to teach reading, and I'm talking phonemic awareness, phonics, going back to the very beginning. It's almost like we stop at elementary school and then we push or promote English language arts, and our children are struggling and they don't understand the concepts or the basics, and so English language arts shows up in standardized assessments, and it shows that we're significantly below the mark. And so the goal was to redesign our instructional models to build in more intentional focus on those core academic areas, specifically reading, because of the significant disparities. And if we're going to have an honest conversation, like COVID exacerbates the issues. Like the learning loss predates COVID. So we've been struggling for quite some time as a result of the funding inequities, as a result of the field, it's not a field that's attracting a lot of quality teachers, nor is it retaining them. And so the vision again with that was to invest in educators, to invest in or build more intentional partnerships to bring in more support, to also re-envision how we teach and prioritize the core academic areas to again address the learning loss. And so what I would say is we have reached a point in history where we see that the traditional models are no longer serving the 21st century learners and beyond. And so we have to rethink education and rethink how we teach. And in that, now is the time where we need to allocate funding to address the teacher shortage and to invest in the core academic areas, so that when we do receive new results from the NAEP or the state standardized assessments, it shows that progress is being made, and it shows that thinking differently does work.
Shock everybody and say I don't completely disagree with anything my panelists have said. But I think there's two things that we need to add to this discussion. We need to educate parents on the state of education and their reading scores. The report card is immensely complicated and really difficult for any parent to navigate what it means. What does it mean to be a 2-star school district in Milwaukee Public Schools today with 15% reading literacy? Right? I mean, I think we don't empower and we don't trust parents enough with this information. And I understand why. I know how we got here, right? It's us being afraid that if we kind of we pull the curtain back, people are going to panic. And then if we lose kids, we lose money, right? But because we've created a system where that's how we incentivize school districts. It's all about the enrollment of kids that you have and the numbers of kids that you have. And so for literacy, I think we have to do two things. I think we have to fund it. I completely agree with that. But we have to fund it in a way that parents understand where the money's going, teachers feel the investment in the classroom, and our communities have a pathway to be engaged. This is happening in Wisconsin right now. Green Bay, the city of Green Bay is currently coming together to try to create a literacy program for their students. But you know who's not at the table in Green Bay? The the district. It's the library system that's leading it, and it's nonprofits that's leading it. St. Norbert's College during the pandemic had really visionary professors that were saying, we have student educators who need to get in the classroom for their hours, and they went and asked for pandemic funding to fund a program that they were setting up individualized tutors of college-educated students who needed to work in classrooms to match them with their students. And not one school district agreed to work with them. We have to start to change the model that reform is scary, and that, you know, when we say let's try something different, it means we're saying school districts are bad. We have great schools, absolutely, but we have to be willing to talk about how we're investing in them, and we have to be transparent in where that money's going, because if you want to get legislators to the table, they want to know, show me the dividends, show me how it's being used. And I believe parents want to know that too. And if we can change that dynamic, I really believe we can tackle literacy in a variety of different ways.
As everybody in this room knows, we got a little problem with partisan polarization in Madison. And with Governor Evers' reelection, this is likely to remain the case. You got a Republican legislature, very strong, in fact a little bit stronger than in the past. You've got a Democratic governor. I referred to him in the paper recently as going to be the man of 1,000 vetoes. I think he already set the state record for vetoes. Is there any hope for like breaking through? Robin Voss, the Speaker of the State Assembly, said he wanted to, in effect, do some horse trading. Give us something for the private school voucher programs, and we'll give you public more money for public schools. Frankly, I'm a little dubious how that's going to work out from both sides. But is there any route to break through to more cooperation, to reduce the partisan divide and the reactions on all sides? This time we'll start with Heather, I think, and come this way.
Well, this is the question that plagues everything that we do, is how did this state get so out of step with itself, so out of step with the needs of kids, with the will of communities, with what parents and communities want the most? And why do we just let it happen cycle after cycle? How do we hold lawmakers accountable for their votes when they're able to time and time vote against the needs and interests of our kids? It's very frustrating to see this fall along party lines, because none of this should be partisan. So I don't believe that this crisis of politics is anything other than manufactured. When I look at things like the National Conference of State Legislatures No Time to Lose report, which came out in 2016, we see that there is bipartisan consensus on what kids need. That former Senator Luther Olson was on this commission. He was one of the people the architects of this document. He came back, he started the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding. We followed that thing all over the state, and we heard from people everywhere what the needs of kids were, what the needs of public schools were, what it would take to move the dial on all of the things we're discussing today. The solutions are in the report that this bipartisan commission put together, which came out in 2019. All of the recommendations that Erin has made today were recommendations that are already on the table in this state and that we have, intentionally refused to take action on. And so I do think that members of both parties understand the needs, know what it's going to take to resolve them, and have some will to do that as humans. But the question is, why don't they have the political will, and how do we fix that? And again, I think the only way we force the political will to change is if we all demand it. I mean, we have to demand better. We're gonna have to wait 10 more years for different district maps, and so we have what we have in terms of the political makeup of the state, but we can change the relationships that we have with our lawmakers. We can make sure that they get into our public schools, that they see what's happening there, that they understand that innovations and exciting, amazing things are happening in every public school in the state. And if we know what kids need and we invest in meeting those needs in the ways that are already working best right now, we can really move the dial. And so I think it starts by educating folks.
So Oakland Reach was mentioned earlier, and I had the opportunity to connect with one of their lead organizers, Lakeisha Young, and I absolutely love the work that they're doing because, one, it's educating parents with no political biases. So it's presenting all the facts, all of the data based on every sector, and then allowing parents to choose. I absolutely love that. And I also love more recently what they're doing with regards to teaching parents how to lobby elected leaders, elected officials, union representatives to promote their collective agenda. And so I think there's value in that. What I would say is, I've spoke with individuals on the far left, and I've spoke with individuals on the far right, and I think the mutual consensus is the growth and progression of children, because one side wants economic prosperity, and we know that, when our children have access to greater quality education, the workforce will thrive. It will benefit greatly. The other side focuses on educational achievement for the purpose of developing a holistically well child who is going to be mentally sound, emotionally sound, and also have the skills that are necessary in order to advance in whatever career pathway. And so I say that to say, I think the commonality in all of it is that we need children to thrive. And for different reasons, the disgusting reality is that we cannot come together on what we need to come together on to get things done. And in my humble opinion, I think that education has been so politicized and so divisive, and that's what we see today. I have reached out to state legislators, and they don't want to meet with me because I'm a representative of Milwaukee Public Schools. And, other individuals have reached out to the district in which the district does not engage for whatever reason. And so I think the bottom line is, when we are talking about prioritizing children, and then when we're serious about that, it's going to show in our practices. And then those practices are going to show in policies and vice versa. And the reality is we're not there. And I think it's going to take bold leadership on every level, from the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, WHEEL, state legislation, and everyone else to come together and say, you know what? I don't like you, you don't like me, but we love children and we got to focus on them. And that has yet to happen.
Very well said. So I would say two things. Again, I'm a big believer that the systems we've created has disincentivized parties coming together, right? When we fund systems and not kids, we're only having the fight of how much money should go to MPS versus how much money should go to the parental choice program. We're coming to a place where we're already on opposite sides. And so I think for true reform, we need to think about how we approach education funding. I also think we need to recognize that 1 in 5 parents in the state of Wisconsin use some form of school choice. Now, I think part of the problem is when I say school choice, you probably think I mean something, and I'm assuming you know what I mean. School choice in this context is 1 in 5 parents use the open enrollment program to attend a different school district of their choice. It's the most popular program in the state. 1 in 5 parents are attending charter schools, are attending or homeschooling, or sending their kid to a parental choice program. What that number doesn't include is interdistrict choice. School parents attending Montessori schools in Milwaukee, right? We have a lot of options, but we don't educate or motivate our parents to feel empowered to use them and to come to the table and be a part of the discussion. And I think we need to leverage parents, because at the end of the day, no matter what poll you look at, it's just like everybody loves their congressman but hate Congress. most parents love their kid's teacher. I love my kindergarten. My daughter's 5-year-old. My daughter's 5. She just started kindergarten, right? I love her teacher. And so I'd go to bat for her teacher. I'd call my legislator tomorrow if I thought my child's teacher needed something more. I think most parents believe that. But when we're talking about a system versus system, rather through the lens of parents, how can we understand what your child needs for success, however you define success, whether that's economic, going to college, getting a job, or being the first in your family to graduate from high school. I mean, we have to really start and reframe our discussion. And I don't think we're going to get both sides of the table until we really give parents a voice to pressure both sides of the aisle to have that conversation.
There's been a lot of great things said here, and I kind of got absorbed in what everyone was saying, and need to sort through my own thoughts. But I agree. However, I'm an old school, go back to the presidential time frame when they go into I use Ronald Reagan as a reference, you go into a locked room with Tip O'Neill, batter it out, and everybody loses a little and everybody wins a little. We need to get back to that type of environment in the state. I don't think that we're hearing each other, and again, I think we're using our children as pawns. And it's really scary when you hear a leader of the assembly come out and make comments, well, you know, we're not going to give you any new money unless you give us universal choice. You know, that's not a good negotiating tactic. It's throwing it out into the public. I think we really too, as everyone said, we need to educate our families and our parents as to what's really happening and what do these report cards say. And 15% proficient and advanced and getting a 2 or 3 star because they meet expectations. How does a new parent or somebody like me 20 years ago who moved to Wisconsin, oh, okay, that school meets expectations. I guess I can live in that school district, you know, and in reality then they're 15% or even less. And so I think we need to be more transparent with how we share our facts with our families and with our the rest of the state. And that's, I'm not cutting on anyone. I'm just indicating that, you know, even as a school board member in Menominee Falls, I was, you know, okay, you know, some of our numbers here this year weren't that good. You know, we shouldn't have gotten this type of number, but I know overall that we were pushing out students that were doing extremely well at the time. So I just would like to encourage, and I don't know what the magic bullet is to get people to work together. I really don't. I think a lot of it comes to, and I think Aisha may have said this, we need to have parents writing letters to your local legislators and over and over. I mean, they need to know, here's what my students need, and it needs to come from the parents because they are their constituents. I got letters as a school board president every day. You know, I don't like the way you do this, I don't like the way you do that. Every once in a while we'd get a attaboy, but you know, it was few and far between, you know, so I can appreciate what it's like. I also can appreciate making phone calls to legislators in a completely Republican district and calling them. They have no interest in meeting with us, you know, so it gets really tough, or they make appointments and then they don't show up. So, you know, that's also tough. We are one of their biggest employers. We have their students, you know, they need to hear from us. And I think, and I'm sure it goes the flip side, you know, that, you know, there may be Democratic leaders that don't want to hear from Republicans. So it's not just my district. And I don't know. Again, I don't know. I know how I ran my school board. We had a great mix of Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and we tried to run back in my day as nonpartisan. And if we were going to have debates, we did it, you know, in closed, not necessarily closed session, but not when anybody was there, and we hashed it out, and we got through it, and we came out for the betterment of the students. So I appreciate the time and the comments.
Teacher issues were certainly important, what Erin Richards was presenting. If you were in charge of the world, what would you do to improve the picture for the entire teacher workforce, individual teachers, the teacher pipeline, any of those terms. Let's start with Libby. What do we do to make things better for teachers?
I think first and foremost, we need to really reform the process of licensure. We make it really difficult for qualified people to get into the classroom. Even if you attend a UW School of Education in Wisconsin, in order to get through the licensure process, we are creating arbitrary barriers that aren't proving to make them high quality teachers. The second thing we're doing is we're making it nearly impossible for teachers to move to Wisconsin and get into our classroom. We heard a comment earlier about volunteering. I've talked to people who have come from Texas who wanted to come be here, and in order to prove that you're a qualified teacher, you have to pull your syllabi from the university you attended. So if you went to Purdue University, you have to pull your syllabi for every single class you took in undergrad and submit it to DPI in order to get approved to be a teacher in Wisconsin. That does not make sense when we are in a teacher crisis shortage in every sector, in every region of our state. I also think there are really fascinating things happening. Aaron talked a lot about a lot of them. Tennessee has a Grow Your Own Teacher program that they actually partnered with the feds on. They get Department of Labor money for basically an apprenticeship program that's running through the district. And so the district has kind of the categorical requirements at the bottom, and then the district is deciding, is this person qualified enough? And they're getting state and federal funding to do that. That's super innovative, and that's really exciting. And we have the capability and the leadership here in Wisconsin, but we've created so much infrastructure or bureaucracy around our teachers that I think we've made it really, really hard to encourage good teachers to get to Wisconsin, to stay in Wisconsin. And then I'm just going to go back to transparency of teacher salary funding. I don't know what the average salary is at MPS for a teacher. I'm not sure the school board could give you a list of every teacher salary range. Like, I think we want to have a conversation about teacher funding. We've got to make it easier to find that information to talk about it. And, you know, that's coming from my policy hat. Like, I want to write the paper, right? I want to talk about that. But if I can't find it, how can parents find it? How can school leaders find it? How can principals advocate for their own staff? And so we have to be thinking about both the bureaucracy of how we get teachers to our area, and we have to be talking about transparency about where the money's going and how it's being spent, because that's how we get to a place where we can really have a conversation about, are we investing in education in the right way, and are we getting the dividends that we really want and expect for every one of our children?
I'm going to answer that question with my mother and teacher hat on. I recall, so I actually received my teaching certification through an alternative program. For those of you that are not aware, Teach for America. I signed up for a 2-year commitment, and I stayed for additional years in the classroom teaching. What I absolutely loved about this non-traditional alternative teaching program was the amount of support that we received ongoing. I remember being assigned a teaching coach in MPS that I still to this day call, ask questions, lean on for support, advice. And that teacher had a caseload, or that teacher mentor had a caseload of about, I would say, maybe 20 teachers. I also compare that to then my experience in Teach for America, where I had a teaching coach that was assigned to me and was able to focus on my growth and development in the class, which required at times them showing up, recording lessons, and debriefing with me, providing evaluations, assessing my behavioral management in my classroom, and so on and so forth. I say all of this to say I think it is very important that we invest in the teaching coaching much more so than we invest in professional development. And I say that because in my time where I've traveled in my district, and I know, Aaron, you said earlier about elected leaders spending time in their classroom, I spend at least 15 hours every week in my district. And in that, I have heard from educators, and I've actually sat through some PD, and it was so outdated, so irrelevant. And I look at my colleagues, or not my colleagues anymore, but I look at the teachers in the district and I ask questions and they're just like, this is boring, this is not relevant, this is not gonna address the challenges that I'm facing in the classroom. And so I think we have to restructure how we invest in teacher development and put more investments in teacher coaching. There was something that came up earlier this year, and we were deliberating and getting ready to pass a budget amendment for longevity pay. And I think it was $4 million that we were, or that one of my colleagues on the board was proposing we put into providing or paying for teacher bonuses. And it was really targeting teachers who were eligible for retirement. And I remember pushing back because my thought was, in this day and age, if I am 1 foot in and 1 foot out, no bonus is gonna keep me here. Why not leverage those educators who are experts, who are seasoned, leverage them by way of connecting them or assigning them to a new teacher or a teacher who may be in like their mid-level career, and provide those additional supports in that way. I felt like that would have been more justified or justifiable with regards to that budget amendment. And I remember being labeled as an anti-teacher, and it's like, no, we're thinking about this wrong. We're thinking about how we're invested in professional development and teacher recruitment and retention all wrong. And until we change that practice, we're going to continue to lose teachers. I see you.
Yeah, no, we just got to keep moving.
Okay.
I think we start by including more teacher voice in conversations like these, by listening to educators, treating them like the professionals that they are, trusting their expertise, and letting that lead and drive our conversations and our decision making rather than talking at and about educators all the time. I think we give teachers the freedom to teach and to do their jobs and stop micromanaging the classrooms in all of these ways that chip away at that sense of worth, value, and professionalism. We need to create environments in our schools where educators feel like they're able to do what they were trained to do well. And that starts with some school, district, and community-wide changes in how we talk about teachers, how we talk to teachers, just kind of climate stuff. But we also need better and more effective pathways to teaching. We need to incentivize these grow your own programs that work so well and that are working very well in some parts of the state. And we need to invest in doing more of that. We need to invest in making sure that teachers are adequately compensated for the work that they do and the time that they give in the school day. And we need to restore collective bargaining so that teachers' voices matter in the decision making every day that happens to them where they live. So these are very common sense things that we shouldn't have to fight for, but should be a part of how we do school all the time. And it's very sad that those things are all at risk right now, but all of it could easily be solved if we just had changes in both attitudes and allocations of funds.
I think first and foremost we need to treat our teachers with respect, that it is a profession and it is very hard work. I've spent 15 years on the school board, and like Aisha, I spent a lot of time, any of those of you in the room that know me, I spent a great deal of time in the classrooms and in the buildings. And it wasn't because I was personally in there snooping. I was asked to be there. I was asked to be an evaluator for our business academy as they presented their final projects at the end of the year before graduation, because they had, confidence that I was there to not nitpick at them, but to praise them and to see the excitement that was going on with the students. I think, though, that we need to, as we talk about changing this process and grow your own, and there are some school districts that are doing a great job. Brown Deer comes to mind with a grow your own project, grow your own with teachers. But those are long term. That takes 3, 4, 5 years to get those kids out of high school and into college and finishing colleges into the classroom. We need teachers now. And one of the issues that could help is if we would just clean up the ability for retired annuitants to come back to work. And they want to work. You see these, they're working somewhere else. We're also losing teachers not because they're retiring, because there is a silver wave coming. Believe it or not, there's a whole lot of older teachers, and one of these days they're going to hang up their hats and say, I'm done. But teachers are leaving because they can go and do something else and make significantly more, come home in the evening and have to not be stressed by the demands that are put on them, constantly put on them, because the needs of the students are greater. You know, there's the needs of the students from the English language learners, and that's all growing. The needs of the low-income students, just the trauma. Kids experience a great deal of trauma during COVID and even now beyond that. So the demands that we're putting on the teachers, the cost, you know, I think this is a whole overall, and that's a whole nother topic of how to overhaul the university system, not just Wisconsin, but everywhere. But let's take a look at, you know, how do we get these students that are interested right into their elective, their choice when they get to college, so that they don't have to spend, you know, a first year just examining around. Let's get them in, get their feet in the door, and then guess what? Let's pay them while they're doing student teaching. My son graduated from Indiana University. He left the state, and for 3 summers he had internships, and he was paid extremely well because he was in the business department. You know, so the companies that paid him he did very well. A lot of these student teachers they're not getting paid. So how do they live for that semester? Student loans. So, you know, it's that continuous cycle. So let's build that in. I'll hurry. And then to your point, Aisha, with the mentors, there are districts that are doing that. I know at Menominee Falls, every time we got a new teacher, they were assigned a mentor, and they stayed with them throughout their tenure. So I think it's a very good point, and teachers shouldn't be afraid of that. So I think there's a lot of great ways that we can help with our teachers, but we need to value it and let people understand that it is a valued profession.
I want to broaden the conversation to bring in some of you in the audience, and I'm going to give Lee the first shot here. She is am I correct, Associate Dean of the Marquette College of Education. What's your thoughts on especially teacher pipeline issues?
And Dean Emeritus Bill Hank is here. And this teacher pipeline, teacher preparation issue is near and dear to our hearts. At Marquette University since 2011, we've had an NSF Robert Noyce Teacher Scholar Program. This is a 14-month post-bac program right now that folks with a STEM degree can come to Marquette University, receive significant scholarship plus a monthly stipend to get a teacher certification, grades 6 through 12 STEM high school classroom. And we continue to use this program to think about other ways to increase the pipeline. One of the things that we're thinking about is how to help the many temporarily licensed STEM teachers across the state of Wisconsin continue to teach, for example, chemistry at Wausau High School, but perhaps enroll in our post-bac program online, right? So that they can teach while finishing their certification and degree. But this is near and dear to our hearts in terms of teacher preparation. And then Bill Hank also worked with Mark Hansen, who was here in the room, I don't know if he's still here, from Elmbrook School District, to develop the launch dual enrollment programs for our high school students. Really important piece to strengthen that teacher pipeline as well. And as I say when I greet our students at Marquette University, I'm the mathematics educator. It turns out teaching requires highly specialized knowledge. We are like heart surgeons, I tell my students, you know, and we wouldn't want personally to go to a heart surgeon who doesn't know and have this highly specialized knowledge. I always joke with our students that we don't question the heart surgeon either. You know, I had biology as a sophomore. I remember there's 4 chambers and a way in and out for blood, but I think you should do this, right? So specialized knowledge, it's important to have these pathways that prepare teachers to instruct children. And our children are missing out on instruction. I always say too, it's not learning loss, because this in a way shifts the blame to our students. It's instructional gaps. It's interrupted instruction. It's missing instruction, and qualified teachers can step in the gap to remedy that. That wasn't a question. Sorry, Alan.
No, that's good. I'd be glad to take other questions and comments. I think we'll go for about 10 more minutes, so please be brief.
Thank you. Chris Holmes from Penfield Children's Center and Penfield Montessori Academy and Independent Charter School. My question is, with Aaron's research about some of the changes that we need to make, how is the leadership of these schools prepared to embrace these kinds of changes? Because I'm seeing a lot of leaders that are trained in the old school model that really have difficulty embracing this kind of change.
Anybody want to react to that?
I was one of the things I didn't mention earlier was I was on the advisory board for a company that's based out of Pensacola called the Studer Group, and they are heavily involved in continuous improvement for education. And our school district in Menominee Falls embraced that. We actually had a great deal of we had tours where we held conferences that people could come in and learn. And as Heather talked about, we need to empower our teachers. That's one of the philosophies with regard to continuous improvement. And that's how we kept teachers involved and excited to be there, because we gave them permission to fail and to try something on small scale. If it doesn't work in your math department in the 10th grade, then we're not going to roll it out to all grades. But as an example, I say that because we had a problem with kids not doing their homework in high school. So they rolled out they said, let's try this program in geometry, and it worked. And I won't go into all the details, but that was an example. We gave them the ability, and this is a long story, a long way to get around to. There are a lot of districts in the state of Wisconsin that are involved in this continuous improvement, and it starts at the top, and administrators are trained to accept and look for change and improvement. So I hope that helps, and I hope there's others that do that.
Briefly, I want to get to some people in the audience too.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I don't think district leaders or school leaders are resistant to these things. I mean, if we look at the list of things that Aaron has suggested that would serve kids best right now, more one-on-one engagements, investing in finding ways to connect with kids, build relationships, have more mentoring, individualize our curriculum to meet the needs of every learner. These are all things school and district leaders would love to have the time and resources to do, but like Aaron said, all of that is very expensive. It's costly. And so if we're going to really support our school leaders in meeting these challenges, we have to give them the resources they need to provide the staff for it. I mean, every school needs to have counselors and social workers and librarians and art teachers and music teachers. And until we have these very basic things, we can't point fingers of blame at school leaders for not being able to address those needs.
Morning. Thanks for taking the time. Is this on?
Yes.
Everybody good? Oh, just two quick questions. One is, where can we find data that talks about the purpose or the reason why people become educators, especially out of the universities? What are they seeking in terms of career satisfaction, as well as where's the data that can support why people are leaving early, pre-retirement? I believe that information would be very helpful at a district level, at least to try to recreate a culture for teachers that not only helps recruitment, but retainment. The other quick question was, there's a lot of conversation out there right now regarding the influx of other curriculum within the schools, a lot of controversy around that may be leaning more towards social and moral issues, which is taking time and resources away from the things that we're talking about, which is, math and reading proficiency. Where do you see that balance coming in?
I'll just say nationally, the Fordham Institute does teacher surveys that are really, really interesting. They do them across the country. They really dive into data, and they've done it over year. So I'm not aware of specific university level data that would show that, but if the Fordham Institute, I think, has done a good job of answering, or at least starting to answer the question about what are teachers saying in surveys that aren't connected to sort of any specific district or state initiative.
One of the things I will say, so I know when we receive resignations, there's an exit interview process where data is collected. I wouldn't say it's the most robust, but I know that a lot of educational entities engage in that work, and the data is collected from that to suggest or to speak to why educators are leaving early, and I'm certain you could do an open records request. I would also say the School of Education with UWM has done some qualitative and quantitative research and have produced reports regarding why educators are leaving. The other thing I will say too, with regards to the curriculum and instruction piece, I think going back to the questions earlier about leveraging teachers as leaders and even investing in teacher leadership, one of the things that I experienced as an educator and that I hear quite often from other teachers is how curriculum and instruction is forced upon them. And being in the classroom, they're in that driver's seat where they understand the diverse learners and how to appeal to and teach students with different learning styles. And in that, I think we have to be more trusting and leverage our teachers as leaders with regards to curriculum and instruction and allow for them to develop curriculums based on their students' needs. Fact of the matter is, when we're talking about recruitment and retention, many teachers leave the field because they're told how to do their job instead of trusting them as leaders and experts of their students. And so we have to trust them, leverage and invest again differently in their professional development that allows for them to have the autonomy to create their curriculum or the curricula that aligns with their student needs. One of the things I would also add is a lot of times we try to change our children to adjust to the curriculums that are out here instead of changing the curriculums to adjust to the students and their needs. And so I think there's, again, many opportunities with that. But I would also say, too, we have to trust our teachers and allow for them or grant them the autonomy to teach and teach in a way they know best.
Yeah, real briefly. I want to get at least one more question in here.
I just wanted to point you toward a recent essay at chalkbeat.org, which was called Respect, Pay, Support, Why Teachers Are Leaving the Classroom. And I mean, those are the three reasons.
I work in philanthropy, so I always think about where the rubber meets the road, just in the classroom, so I really appreciate all the references there. I also think about what things are not. I believe that schools have way too many expectations put on them. They have to do a whole lot more in our society than just educate kids. So I think of what are the things that are necessary just by reality to be successful in schools that are not part of what a school is sort of designed for. And I can't help but think lately that civics and civic engagement, not just politics, but just understanding what our role in society is, having a community, volunteerism, I can't help but believe that that's something that schools need, that is not built into like their structure and maybe relies outside partners. And I wonder if the folks on the panel think that that is a role that is not being satisfied in schools, and if there are, or is it just like everything's on fire and that's low on the priority list?
So I come from the perspective of I really trust parents. And so I think the engagement of parents with school districts, while it's been volatile and really intense, I'm a believer that it's ultimately going to get us to the place that we really need to, which is parents having a seat at the table and school districts being responsive to their communities. Pre-pandemic, I used to beg parents who would call me and complain about whatever and say, can you sue over this? I used to beg them, go to your school district board meeting. They are the ones making the decision. And that's changed, and I think that's really a good thing. And I think, but democracy is messy, and I think civics is really messy. And so, excuse me, I'm really concerned about going down the route of mandating civics, because I don't think we should keep mandating additional classes onto our school districts. But I do think that we need to get comfortable with dialogue, and sometimes really difficult dialogue at our school level, because I ultimately believe that that's going to result in positive change for individual school communities, because schools are at their best when they're responsive to their own communities and not responding to the state legislature or the U.S. Department of Education.
I would also, to add to what she said, I would also say that we have to lean on our partnerships more, because what schools cannot do, we have community-based organizations that can. And so focusing on developing intentional partnerships, because to your point, like, we're already overloading educators, and the expectations are so great. And if we take it a step further, a lot of the expectations kind of push them beyond teaching. And in this day and age, we're seeing educators wear the hat of parents, mental health specialists, and everything else. And so I think it's important that we find a way to engage, to teach our students, our teachers, school leaders, our parents, our communities about the civic education piece, but not at the expense of teachers, where we're demanding more. And again, that's, I would say that the beauty in that is really relying on community-based organizations to partner with the district and to fill that gap where necessary. And there are some amazing organizations, youth-led organizations that are already doing the work, but how do we get that to reach every student and every teacher and every school? And the reality is we're not there yet, but I think civic education is very important, and I think we have to prioritize that, especially seeing the direction in which our country is heading, and the racial tension, and the political divide. We have to do a better job at educating them, and educating them also not to suggest or imply that we're telling them what to think or who to support or who to vote, but showing the broader, greater picture and allowing for them to decide what issues they stand for, what issues they don't, and it's speaking beyond politics. But I think there's opportunities there, and I think in this day and age, again, with the stress and the load of teachers being so great, we have to rely on our community-based partnerships.
I'll just add that public schools are laboratories of civic engagement in their very nature. And all of the ways that democracy affords us to participate in our public schools are things our kids are seeing and learning as they go through our systems. So that is an opportunity that only public schools are required to and do provide to our kids. And so I think we do an excellent job in this state of modeling how that works. And there are remarkable civics education programs and projects going on in public schools statewide. I think it's a bit of a myth that we aren't teaching civics in Wisconsin, because most districts love civics and teach it as robustly as they are able.
I think we need to stop the formal program here. I'm glad to have you continue the informal program, even hanging around here this morning. And we certainly will continue to make subjects like this a focal point of our programming here at the Lubar Center at Marquette Law School and with the College of Education, our partner in putting these programs on. I would say, as a closing observation, if the question is, so now what? We've got a huge amount of need. We've got some ideas out there that came up here this morning, and certainly in other places, that could really help. it's not going to be easy. The politics, the polarization, just the difficulty of the issues. I mean, it's complicated to be in the education space these days. It's not easy to make progress. If it was, there'd be a lot more. But nonetheless, I think there's more common ground here than even I would have expected today as far as what kids need, what the benefit is of finding ways to address those needs, and the hope, even if it's an uphill battle, that maybe people can come together. That happened in the state capitol in Madison. You can hope. It ain't going to be easy. But I think it's people such as yourselves, hear from diverse bases and diverse views, having conversations like this that I hope does build some flame to make this into a bigger fire and to change. I want to greatly thank the people on this panel. I want to thank Faith Vanderhorst and Heather DuBois Burnane and Aisha Carr and Libby Sobek. I want to thank Aaron Richards again. And the people here at the law school who worked hard on making this happen, the people at the College of Ed. Especially want to thank all of you who are willing to put your time not only here but in so many other ways into dealing with these issues. And the member of the Milwaukee School Board who, whenever they appointed new leaders at board meetings, he would always say, I think I'm pretty close to a correct quote here, go forth and do good. And that's what I hope all of us will do. And I hope we'll stay in touch as far as programs here and more broadly than that. So great thanks to all of you for being here. And that's it.